Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next session, Enhancing Your Social Connection Programs with Lessons Learned from Meals on Wheels programs, where we will hear learnings from a study conducted by Brown University and Meals on Wheels America, a valued coalition steering committee member, to compare the effectiveness of 6 Meals on Wheels social connection programs. We will learn insights into drivers of successful programming, barriers, and perceptions of the older adults receiving these services. Our first speaker will be Laura Belazis, Senior Director of Strategy and Impact at Meals on Wheels America. Laura leads the socialization and safety portfolios within the organization. We will then hear from Jane Yuhasz, Meals on Wheels Volunteer Coordinator and Nutrition Training and Implementation Manager for Real Services, Inc. in Northern Indiana. She also leads the Real Friends Telephone Reassurance Program, which works to address social isolation and loneliness in homebound seniors in a 5-county area. Laura, I'll first hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Jillian. I also wanted to say thank you to everyone who is joining this session. We've geared the session as organizations or community groups who are working to address social isolation and loneliness in their own communities, and lessons learned from the Meals on Wheels network to help drive successful program approaches. Next slide, please. Now, we've talked a lot at the Action Forum about isolation and loneliness across the age span, and I've been really encouraged by all of the creative solutions that have been shared, both in the presentations and by all of you in the chat. In this session, we wanted to take a deeper dive into how social isolation and loneliness affects older adults. In the US, we have a rapidly growing older adult population that's set to increase by more than half by 2060. Older adults are at high risk of social isolation and loneliness, with 1 in 4 living alone and 1 in 3 feeling lonely. And this is even more pronounced for older adults who are homebound. Next slide. Among older adults in the US, about 8% living in community are homebound. Some of the common issues affecting homebound older adults may sound really familiar to you. As we age, our lives change and are filled with more complexities, many of which put us at greater risk for social isolation and loneliness. Our families are often spread out. We may not live close to them. We may retire from work or lose touch with friends. We may experience the loss of a spouse or loved ones. Next slide. And that's where Meals on Wheels comes into play. For more than 50 years, our network of community-based programs has served as an essential source of social connection for older adults, helping them to age in place at home, which is where they want to be. I mentioned earlier that 1 in 4 seniors live alone, but among older adults receiving home-delivered meals, the number's more than half. Next slide. Across the country, more than 5,000 local Meals on Wheels programs support older adults by providing nutritious meals, friendly visits, safety checks, and connections to other resources and services they might need in their communities. And social connection is a vital part of their work. Among Meals on Wheels clients, we often hear that the person delivering their meals is the only person they see that day, or maybe even that week. Next slide. Now, many people associate Meals on Wheels primarily with home-delivered meals, but it's really about so much more than a meal. Local Meals on Wheels organizations offer valuable opportunities to socialize and make connections during meal deliveries, but they often offer more extensive social connection programs. This could be a friendly visiting or calling program, where volunteers are matched with clients to provide companionship. Or it could be group activities or creative aging programs, or even pet assistance to help older adults keep and care for their animal companions. Next slide. At Meals on Wheels America, we're always asking, how do we move the needle on social isolation and loneliness? A number of systematic reviews have examined social isolation and loneliness interventions for older adults. But the evidence remains inconclusive about which formats are most effective, and many interventions are also prohibitively cost or resource intensive for local organizations. This makes it difficult to translate research into action. To this end, Meals on Wheels America designed a research study with Brown University to explore the effectiveness of some of the most commonly found Meals on Wheels social connection programs. Next slide, please. At last year's Action Forum, I announced this study and our commitment to action. And while the study is ongoing, we're excited to be here this year with some preliminary results. The study included 6 Meals on Wheels America members with 3 different types of programs: friendly visiting, telephone reassurance, and activity programs. Brown University conducted 120 interviews with staff, volunteers, and clients with a goal of identifying drivers of successful programs and barriers and perceptions of the clients who are receiving these services. We'd like to highlight a few of the initial findings that may be translatable to your own programs. Next slide. First, it's important to document work processes, ensuring their standard operating procedures. This isn't always a top priority at busy direct service organizations who are putting clients first, but it's an important part of making sure that roles and responsibilities are clear and ensuring that programs continue smoothly when staff turnover occurs. Next. Second, it's important to use a variety of strategies to recruit volunteers and clients. This may include phone outreach, paid advertising, mailed flyers, press releases, etc. It's also important to make sure that your team consistently uses a clear program description and also translates materials as needed for your community. Next slide. Third, it's important to provide clear guidelines for communication, including setting boundaries on what's in scope for your program so your volunteers and clients have the same expectations, and to create guidelines such as avoiding sensitive conversation topics. It's also important to gather feedback and share it back. We're often very deliberate about collecting data, but don't always prioritize sharing it with key stakeholders. For example, sharing the results of client surveys with volunteers so that they understand their own impact. Next. Fourth, it's important to gather data to measure if and how the program's working. This will help you make course corrections, strengthen partnerships, and enhance your ability to fundraise to support the program. Next slide. Finally, it's important to collaborate with community partners. No one organization can provide every service, but by working together, we can enhance each other's work to build thriving communities. Next slide. And now I'd like to turn it over to Jane Yuhasz from Real Services in South Bend, Indiana. Real Services is a Meals on Wheels America member, and you'll hear from Jane what this work looks like in her community.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon at this point for most of you. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to be a part of this, and we were really excited to be part of the Brown study. In my slides, you're going to see that I work for a service organization called Real Services, Inc., and we are based out of South Bend, Indiana. We have over 20 programs, but one of our biggest is Meals on Wheels. So before I start this, I want to tell you about my past life. I was an executive manager for Target for 12 years, and if you think you love shopping at Target, I loved working at Target. And one of the things I loved was something called the Great Team Card. The Great Team Card, if you're not familiar with it, was recognition that we gave to some of our employees. They were a great job for this, great job for that. And they meant a lot, and they filled up a lot in the back room. So I had this card attendant, Dave, and I knew him very well. Dave was actually a senior, and he worked every day. He was quiet. He did a great job. And, you know, you'd hand him a Great Team Card, and he'd kind of grumble, but you could tell he liked it. Well, one day Dave didn't come into work, and he always came into work. And then he didn't come in the next day. So we reached out to his emergency contact, which was his sister in California. And once the police had gotten there, David passed away. It was really sad because I knew he was a senior. I didn't know who else he had locally. And when his sister invited me to the funeral, when we got there, around the casket and flowers were a lot of bulletin boards with all of Dave's Great Team Cards. And so what I took from that before I even went to nonprofit was how important it is to stay connected and how much socialization means to people. So, oh my gosh, March 13th, 2020, President Trump declared COVID-19 a national emergency. And we're all thinking, wait, what? Now what happens? So immediately, whatever your age was, you were feeling fear, you were feeling anxiety. I wasn't even thinking at that time about how our seniors were feeling because we were also worried about our families. And so connections that immediately halted for our seniors here locally and for seniors around the globe really was loved ones were less likely to physically be able to visit their senior family members out of an abundance of caution. I know you remember seeing pictures on the news of children and grandchildren pressing their hands to the nursing homes or assisted living. And so the connection was just really through glass. Doctor visits became virtual and grocery shopping halted because transportation stopped. And here at Real Services, we provide both of those services. So things became virtual. If no one was at home for the seniors, how would they even connect? And then our Meals on Wheels volunteers stopped delivering due to the kitchen closing down. So those constant connections Monday through Friday, our seniors were now missing. So let's talk about the origins of the call. So the question was at the time, how do we keep staff working when we aren't able to transport or deliver to our seniors every day? So at the kitchen, they had approximately 15 staff that either worked in the hot side, the cold side, they prepared the meals, and transportation staff that would drive them every day that were affected by the operations. So there was no work for them to do here. Rides stopped, meals made in the kitchen stopped, and our nutrition sites that we have 36 of, where mobile seniors can go to, stopped as well. The directors and the CEO put together a plan to call clients who would normally see us in person each day and just see if they had everything they needed. So we established food partnerships with frozen food companies and we dispersed all those. But we were making these phone calls and the staff kept coming back to the director and saying, people are lonely. They're isolated, like their families aren't here and they have nowhere to go. They don't even know when they're going to be able to get out of the house. So they were calling, and then all of a sudden things opened up in Northern Indiana and we had to return. So how do they continue to run the program? So once they returned to the office and started meals again, meal prep, and driving a few people, it left our clients without the valuable conversations they look forward to weekly. Some people were monthly, some chose every other week, but they had several that really needed a weekly phone call. Some had survived COVID, some had lost family members due to COVID, or someone they knew. Most were still homebound and just not able to socialize due to the threat. So we did request and receive funding from the Title III OAA funds. As we move forward with the funds, they tried to seek out volunteers who would be willing to make calls and assign it to the Meals on Wheels program. And then they were looking for volunteers that can make calls outside of 8 to 5. So can you call at night? Can you call on the weekend? And so that was the goal, was not to limit it first to the 8 to 5 calls. So as you can see on the next slide, they started to create a telephone reassurance program. And I say they because my time at Real Services and Meals on Wheels came in August last year. So the first questions they asked themselves, well, who will be in charge? So because the other staff were able to work from home, like the care managers and some of the management, they decided it should stay hubbed in Meals on Wheels. What was the objective? So they wanted to continue to reach out to clients who needed the calls. And at first they started to take a tally of who wants a call back, who really needs more help than just the meals at this time. And they kept trying to assign people to meet everyone on that list. And then how will they measure success? So at the time they thought by receiving continuous weekly check-in forms and reports that, and then having enough volunteers to meet that need, that's how they were going to measure it. Okay. And this again was back in, starting in March of 2020. And now we're kind of into, let's say, January of 21. And then, so unfortunately, sometimes things don't go as planned. It's called life. I put that in there because we all know working for organizations that we really have great plans and great strategies, but then sometimes we don't have the people or the follow through because sometimes there's not enough of us. So then I came to Meals on Wheels in January of this year. And one of the first things I saw was that the program had stalled due to lack of volunteers and staff. So we already went over some of those points. The staff began driving the Meals on Wheels routes because volunteers weren't available. Some of them were really fearful of driving back and forth and everything. And if you have driven Meals on Wheels or if you have volunteers, you know that most of our volunteers are older too. Transportation staff began driving clients to essential appointments once the businesses started opening back up. And then there just wasn't enough volunteers to promote the calls. So we had some clients that were still receiving calls, but then a lot of them just fell off. So going forward, thinking of Dave that I talked about at the beginning, I remembered him and he stuck with me. And I thought about this program. And so once I first came on, our director said, we have a really great program. It's really viable. We need volunteers. We need some energy around it. And so I said, okay, great. So we decided to start to put some new energy into Real Friends. So in February, we made an effort to revive the program, reconnect with old friends, and to seek new friends. As we were calling some of the clients that had, we called everybody who had original intake forms, and we assessed their interest in still being involved in the program. Some people had passed away. I did have to check obituaries, and we'd lost about 5 or 6 people. Some people didn't need calls anymore. Some had moved in with family, but there were still a lot of them that really wanted phone calls. And then all the Meals on Wheels volunteers who didn't return to volunteer with deliveries because of their fear of COVID, I asked them, are you willing to make a phone call? how would you feel about just connecting with someone? And some of them actually got reconnected with old clients they had on the Meals on Wheels routes. So our recruitment of new volunteers, I knew that we had to start looking for people. We sent this flyer to all current newsletter recipients, which is over 2,000 people. Again, Real Services is broad within 5 counties, and we have over 20 programs, so had a lot of people on that mailing list. We distributed it to nutrition site clients who were seniors and attending our congregate sites, those that are still mobile enough to get food from us, but they're congregating. And we distribute it to local nonprofit and business partners of the Real Services in the community. So our results was we did recruit 11 new volunteers and 7 returning volunteers who have previously with Meals on Wheels, which was really exciting. So we created a flyer, and I can have this available through email too if anyone wants to see it if you're starting a program. And it was about, it said things like, would you like to, or well, are your thumbs tired of texting was one thing. And would you like to make someone's day and just hear a friendly voice in the phone other than spam? So that was kind of our trigger at first to try to get people in. So in talking about the recruitment of new clients, and again, we had a flyer for this too. And simply at the top, it said lonely, ? We distributed this to 280 Meals on Wheels clients through mailboxes. We emailed the flyer to surrounding assisted living facilities, posted the flyer at the nutrition sites, and postal mailed former telephone reassurance clients before we molded into real friends that we couldn't connect with on the phone. And so the results were 139 bona fide clients needed bona fide phone calls. So what were our key components of meeting the client's needs? And this is a little different than how they began, because they began at first just calling people to see if they needed help. Well, we found that we really needed to match volunteers and clients just to make sure they were getting someone they could trust, someone they could build a relationship with. We also wanted to look at flexibility in day and time. From the beginning, we knew that 8 to 5 wasn't everybody's cup of tea with phone calls. Sometimes they weren't home. Sometimes they wanted to call when their caregiver was out late, out later in the day. And then consistency in volunteer calling. So we knew that the continuity of care of someone calling was the familiar voice and someone they could trust and share experiences with. So building positive and caring connections. I have Miss Stella there, and I said, yes, I have my own client. Stella is actually 98, and we've since visited quite a bit in person, but my phone call started with her in February of this year, and we've just built a fantastic relationship. I now see her since we have a little more flexibility with COVID, and we found that we love gardening together. She has a huge family, but they all live outside of South Bend. And she has been widowed now for 10 years. So she just wanted that extra person that she could share things with. So I connected with Stella because we had so many things in common. So after we defined who our interested volunteers and clients were, we matched them. So as I say on this slide, some clients requested a male or female. Stella was one that wanted a female. It doesn't matter the age. Some older adults thought that this was kind of like a way to meet people, like a dating service in a way. So that made us chuckle, but this was more about building those friendships. Some requested a widow or widower, someone who knew how to relate to grief or loss. We also had a lady who wanted someone who may have lost a child because she lost 2 adult children. We weren't able to fulfill that with our volunteer match, but I did find someone who had lost a sibling younger, and they seemed to really build a nice relationship. Some wanted someone from their town. So we serve a lot of small towns in northern Indiana, and they wanted somebody who lived in New Carlisle or Akron. Someone had calls when they had a tough anniversary, like the death of a loved one. I know that Stella and I talked on the date of her wedding anniversary, and that was a nice call, and she was able to reflect on things from her past. And then some sought clients who shared similar hobbies. That was one we obviously wanted to work on because some of them just, somebody might like racing, but the other person might like knitting. We just wanted to make sure we had a good match. Flexibility that matters. Again, we talked about this, but one of the successes of the program is its flexibility. It's not only about when the clients want the calls, but it's when volunteers can give their time. I think one of the things we struggle with here is one of the reasons our Meals on Wheels volunteers are more of an aged group is because so many people my age and younger are working full-time during the day. And so this has pleased many volunteers to know that they can connect with a senior in the area, and it can be on a weekend, it can be in the evening. If they want to stop by for coffee, they can. So even though this began as a telephone isolation program, they have built some networks where someone's taken a cake on their birthday or they've met for coffee at a local little hut or something. Doesn't happen often, but that's up to them if they want to take the next step. And again, at the bottom there, one of the volunteers one time told me, said, I make a lot of pajama phone calls. So I think that's so great that she's able to do that. So fostering comfortable and comforting conversations. These are some of the things that I gave to the volunteers as far as creating their base of where they were going to work from, their foundation. So we created introductory forms to promote conversations during the first phone call, including days and times that work best for the client and volunteer. We also have things on there like who is important in your life, who is close to you, what's one of your favorite memories. Updated logs for the volunteers to use during calls. So I have a real tracker, I call it, and they'll write down notes for me. Sometimes the notes will say something like, Susie really needs help weatherizing her trailer. Can we find somebody locally? We also found a couple people that have needed ramps. And, if anyone is familiar with working with free or limited, how can I say this? Housing repairs for the elderly is so difficult, to find anybody who will do it cheap or for next to nothing. Began weekly emails with volunteers. So we'd welcome them to the program. I'd give stats from our area, celebrating small wins between the calls and sharing local resources. So that's where we started to share things like weatherizing. And if we heard of any electric assistance programs, so maybe they needed help paying their bills, the ramps, things like that. So when resources came along, we'd be able to pass them on to them. I think I'm getting a question with someone asking about recruitment being the biggest problem. Well, I think going back to the ways that we diversified who we were looking for. So it was not only sending out to local businesses. I even reached out to a couple companies and I said, hey, I don't want the list of your retired names, but can I give you something if you have any retirees that are looking for something to do in their spare time? So we actually got a couple people from that. We've got some corporations around here that were able to get that to their former employees. I think also it's just that constant social networking to the social media. So we posted a lot on Facebook when this first started, how this was a program we were trying to really revive and keep going because we wanted it to be sustainable. So I would say some of those methods. We also revamped the Real Friends Manual to give them tips on how to have conversations and how to steer clear of certain topics. This was actually really important because at the time, and we still know there's some political heat all over, and we wanted to make sure that if a caller went a certain way, the volunteer could try to steer it in a positive direction. And with these folks not having a lot of mental health background, they were just looking for ways to make sure that they steered it back positively. If they ever had a question about someone's cognition, or maybe they weren't acting as happy as they used to be, or they seemed like they were struggling with depression, we would link them with resources. And I would actually make a phone call to the client and see how they were doing and hopefully steer them in the way of getting some help. Okay, this is just a sample email to a new volunteer. I just got word that you're an official Real Friends telephone reassurance volunteer. I'm happy to have you on our team. And then I would tell them, before I assign you, let me explain a bit of the program. We would talk about what we wanted them to do, how many, when they could, what they could say to them during their introductory calls. And again, those are forms that I have that I can definitely send out to you. And you'll see that at the end. All right. So then we celebrated so we had February to April boom and stabilization of program. So volunteers called clients with introductory call forms, which gave them talking points during their initial phone calls. Volunteers are using their tracking logs. They use resources and numbers through Real Services, and they submitted tracking forms to keep up with us each week. And the way that this is a tiny, but I just wanted to show you a parallel here of how the program benefited both clients and volunteers. So with the clients, it helps deter feelings of isolation and loneliness. They have a consistent call time and volunteer. And again, with that, it helps the volunteers have the flexibility within their schedules. For both of them, really builds relationships of trust and friendship. And in some cases, it's the only call they get during the week. So as Laura had said earlier, we hear that sometimes the only people that our Meals on Wheels clients see are us, the drivers. We did a study in 2019, and 62% of our clients said that Meals on Wheels drivers are the only people they interact with during the day. So that's why this became so important of a focus too. Clients are able to share challenges they have, and volunteers are able to identify local resources. And just going back to the topic of depression, some of them would tell their volunteers, I just feel depressed. I just don't have the care to do anything like I used to. And so they would talk through that. And then if they needed to, we did have some links within Real Services we could connect them with. Just a few numbers to give you. So in February, and this is why I said stabilization, we had the 139 clients that needed callers. And then you can see where we only had about 20 or so total calls that were done. By April, we had done over 150 calls. In June, a little over 150. By August, it stabilized to where everybody who needed a call was getting a call. These are just a couple quotes I thought you guys would like to read. They're from the real trackers that came in. I'll tell you one on the bottom left I loved. Mr. Hillary was pleased with the turnout at his mother's memorial service. He's been spending time in his ex-wife's garden helping her. He is having his call tomorrow with Brown University, and he's happy to participate. He said he's very appreciative of the help Real Service has given him. The one on the bottom right, too, I love also. It was one of my volunteers. Jane, it's Barb. I wanted to let you know that my cruise starts next week, but I will be calling my clients from the cruise. I have taught a few of them how to do video calls, and I'm hoping to show them the ship. And she did. So that was awesome. Just talking about connecting friends to more resources. So these were a few examples of how we help clients connect to other local resources. Weatherization we talked about with the mobile home weatherization. Cleaning and home maintenance, that's a big one we get calls on all the time. So 3 to 4 clients received help with spring cleanup and ramp repairs. Energy assistance, we're able to connect them to energy assistance program to help with their winter heating bills. And of course, Meals on Wheels. Some of them we reached out to were not receiving meals, and at this time they were able to qualify for them. I wanted to include this because it's not always cheery when you call. And we had a couple that was married almost 75 years, Wendell and Arlene Grass. And I just call this providing comforting conversation at the end of life. But I put logs over on here that spanned about 3.5 months. And Arlene's health was failing. She had dementia. She was getting a little slower in that, but Wendell was right there with her. He fell a couple times too. But by 8/21, this was so critical to me. Wendell's wife, Arlene, passed away last week. So sorry to hear. He said it has been very rough since they've been married 74 years. I believe they were close to 75 years. He had family staying with him, but this was his first day alone. He was glad I called, and we spent almost an hour on the phone. I am so sad for him. That memory will stick with me forever because we've never met them face to face, the Grasses, but this was so critical that my volunteer Chris had created this relationship with them, and he was happy that she called. It was the day after, so that's a really big deal. So the one thing I continue to talk about with our director and our team here is the sustainability of Real Friends. How do we go forward? So these are some of the things that might be on your mind too. How do we do more outreach for those that don't receive Meals on Wheels? Like those who might be receiving Mom's Meals or another frozen food vendor, because that might be all we supply for them. How can the program be sustainable for the long haul year round? The reason why I say year round is sometimes in the summer, people don't get our calls as much. We noticed our call volume dropped a little bit towards August because people are on vacation or their families came in. Same volunteers and clients had the same thing. But now we're starting to ramp up again because it's getting to be a colder season. What other nonprofits can we partner with? Senior home repairs are one of the biggest challenges, and who can we find locally to help? I wish I had an answer for that because that's one of the biggest questions we get are those senior home repairs. How do we market the program to seniors? How do we diversify our outreach? So, we do social media, we do flyers, but how else can we do it? So we're trying to figure out what areas do we need to go to? What platforms do we need to be on? Do we need further training on any mental health concerns? Most volunteers are present during the conversations, but what if we have a concern? And again, that's a little tough for us because once we get those flags, that's when I have to partner with somebody within our organization. And if we don't have to do that, if we have some other ways we can handle it, do we do the training? How do we continue to find volunteers? Again, someone already asked that. And I think it's just being deliberate about, how often you send out flyers or social media contacts, or we had a local newspaper that put us a notice in there too that we were looking for people. And then how do we involve a younger audience? I was thrilled to get 2 girls recently that are driving for Meals on Wheels for us now, and they're in social work at IU. But how do we find other ones? Again, it's just a phone call. Okay, so that was my presentation. I really appreciate you listening today. I'm sorry that I couldn't show the slides, but I did put at the end, if you want more info about our program, if you're looking to start your own or just have some questions, please email me there, and I'll be happy to get you anything I can. So thank you so much, and good luck to all of you.
Wow, thank you so much, Jane, and thank you, Laura. We really appreciate you taking us through the findings of the study, Laura and Jane going deep into the details on the REAL program. We'll make sure to share these slides on our website as well as the video recording of this session. And I know you had a couple links in there, so we'll make sure to get those from you so that we can share them with our audience as well.